Get out of the truck now. What did I do, officer? Big, black, and parked where you don't belong. That's what you did. Jerome Calloway stepped out with his hands already raised, palms open, fingers spread, the way 14 years of discipline had trained his body to move before his mind. I'm a United States Marine, sir. My ID is in my back pocket. I don't need your ID. I've got eyes, and my eyes tell me everything I need to. Deputy Wade Kessler kicked Jerome's feet apart with the toe of his boot, pressed a forearm between his shoulder blades, and shoved his cheek flat against the cooling hood of his own. Down the street, porch lights flicked on. A woman in a bathrobe watched from behind a screen door and did not come outside. Nobody stopped. Nobody said a word. What Deputy Kessler had no way of knowing was that in less than 3 hours, a 3-star general would walk through the doors of the Calder County Sheriff's Office in full-dress uniform and salute the man he had just called. To understand how a decorated war hero ended up spread-eagled on his own hood in a quiet cul-de-sac in North Carolina, you have to go not hours, years. Jerome grew up in Millbrook, a small mill town 40 minutes outside Charlotte, where the tobacco warehouses had closed in the 90s and never reopened. His mother, Odessa Calloway, spent 23 years on her feet behind the deli counter at a grocery store on Route 9, up before 5, home after dark, raising 3 boys on a wage that never quite stretched far enough and a pride that refused. Jerome was the middle son, quiet, watchful. While his brothers chased trouble, and girls, Jerome chased order, the kind of order that told him exactly where he stood and exactly what. He found it the week after his 18th birthday, in a recruiter's office, with a flag on the wall and a poster of men in dress blues. Odessa cried the whole drive to the bus station. She pressed a small brass compass into his palm before he boarded, one that had belonged to her own father, and folded his fingers closed around it. So you always know which way home is, she told him. He carried that compass in his left breast pocket, through 2 deployments to Iraq and 1 to Afghanistan, through sandstorms and silence and everything in between, and he was carrying it on his 3rd deployment, the one. It was August in Kandahar province, 116 degrees in the shade, when his squad walked into an ambush in a narrow wadi with no cover on. 2 men went down in the first 8 seconds. Corporal Danny Ossie took a round through his thigh. Lance Corporal Ray Whitfield caught shrapnel across his back and couldn't move his. Every man in that unit did the math in half a second. Going out into that open ground meant dying. Jerome went anyway. He crossed 380 meters of exposed dirt under direct fire, dragged Ossie's 210 pounds of dead weight behind a collapsed wall, then went back through the same kill zone. When he was done, he flanked the ridge alone and took out the position that had pinned his squadron for 11 minutes, moving through the rocks the way his commanding officer would later describe, in sworn testimony, as the single most extraordinary act of combat he had witnessed. For that, Jerome Calloway received the Medal of Honor. The ceremony was in the East Room. Odessa stood in the front row in a dress she'd bought on layaway, crying into the same hands that had once packed his lunch for the bus station. The man who pinned the medal around his neck was Lieutenant General Theodore Marsh, commanding officer of Marine Forces going to command, a man who had buried more Marines than he could count and who did not hand out praise easily. After the ceremony, Marsh pulled Jerome aside and said 5 words he never forgot: "You're the best of us." From that day on, Marsh became something more than a commanding officer. He called on birthdays. He wrote letters by hand after every promotion. That is the kind of bond that only exists between a man who watched someone run towards certain death and lived to watch. Jerome served 3 more years, then retired. Not because he was tired of the Corps, but because something in Millbrook kept pulling at kids, growing up the way he had, without fathers, without money, in a county that had already decided who they were before they'd had a chance to prove otherwise. He started volunteering at the Calder County Youth Center on Tuesdays and Thursdays, teaching discipline, teaching respect, teaching 31 kids between the ages of 11 and 17 that the world's opinion of them was not the final word. That Friday evening, Jerome had just wrapped a session at the youth center. He'd brought the Medal of Honor in its case to show the kids. A ritual he did twice a year, letting them hold the weight of it in their hands so they'd understand that ordinary people from ordinary towns could. The case sat now in his glove compartment. He took the long way home, through a neighborhood called Ashford Hollow, to avoid construction on Route 9. Windows up, headlights on, radio low, speed limit exactly 35. And then the blue and red lights bloomed in his. Now rewind just a little, because to understand how a routine stop turned into a national headline, you need to understand the man behind the badge. Deputy Wade Kessler had worn the Calder County uniform for 16 years. 43 years old, a buzz cut that hadn't changed since the academy, and a reputation that depended entirely on who. To the residents of Ashford Hollow, he was the officer who drove the loop twice a shift and waved at the retirees walking their dogs. To the department's internal affairs office, he was something else. 4 excessive force complaints in 8 years. Every one of them closed without an outside review. A pattern sitting in plain sight that nobody had bothered to read, because Kessler's supervisor, Sheriff Roy Pemberton, cared about exactly one number. Arrests that stuck. Kessler produced numbers. Nobody asked how. He called it instinct. He never wrote that word down in a report. On paper, it was always a broken taillight, a suspicious lane change, a vehicle matching a description that, more often than not, did not actually exist. Ashford Hollow had logged 6 car break-ins in the past 3 weeks, and the neighborhood group chat had turned into a wall of panic and speculation. Pemberton told Kessler to increase patrols. So when Kessler saw a black Ford F-250 turn off the county road at dusk, driven by a black man in a gray hoodie, his radio was in his hand before the thought had finished forming and got a visual on a suspicious vehicle entering Ashford Hollow from the south. He said into the mic, "Black male, dark, let's light him up." On the other end of that call was Deputy Marcus Doyle, 26 years old, 18 months on the job, still trying to disguise his nerves behind Kessler's swagger. In 6 months riding with him, Doyle had learned exactly one rule: don't question Wade. He pulled his cruiser in behind Kessler's, boxing the truck in, lights flashing, siren silent, the kind of stop that looks routine from a distance. Jerome saw the lights and did not panic. He did not speed up. He did what 14 years of training had carved into his instincts. He controlled the moment by controlling. He pulled to the shoulder, cut the engine, flipped on the interior dome light so the officer could see clearly into the cab, and set both hands on the wheel at 10 and his heart rate did not so much as tick upward. He had survived ambushes in Kandahar. A traffic stop in North Carolina was not going to rattle him. Kessler approached from the driver's side with his hand already resting on his holster. Not standard procedure. He didn't identify himself. He didn't state a reason for the stop. He aimed his flashlight directly into Jerome's eyes and held it there. "License and registration." "Yes, sir." "I'm reaching into my back pocket, slowly." "You'd better be slow." Jerome handed over both documents. Kessler studied the license under his flashlight, the way a man studies a forgery he's determined to find, even though there was a clean record, no warrants. Registration matched the plates matched the truck. Any reasonable officer would have handed the documents back and said Kessler did not hand them back. "Jerome Calloway," he read aloud, like the name itself was a punchline. "What are you doing out here in the—" "Taking a shortcut, officer. Instructions on Route 9. A shortcut. Through here. After dark. In a hoodie." Jerome said nothing, because there was nothing to say that wouldn't make. Kessler called dispatch to run the plates anyway. The answer came back clean in under a minute. He stared at his own radio like it had betrayed him personally. "Step out of the vehicle." "My documents are in order, officer. I haven't committed a violation. Step out, now." That should have been. It was only the beginning. The evening had gone cold, and still by the time Jerome stood against the hood, with his palms flat on the metal, feet spread at Kessler's command, a silver sedan rolled slowly past. An older couple inside stared, then looked away, then kept driving. "Nothing to see here," Kessler called out to them. And they believed him because that word, routine, has a way of making people look past exactly the behind him. Doyle shifted his weight from foot to foot, opened his mouth as if to speak, and said nothing. "Here's what I think," Kessler said, circling behind him slowly. "Savoring it. I think you're not taking a shortcut. I think you're casing the 6 break-ins in 3 weeks, and now here you are. Big guy, dark truck, hoodie, after dark. I volunteer at the youth center. I teach kids 3 afternoons a week. Teach them what?" Kessler laughed. "How to case a house. I'm going to search your vehicle," he said next.
"On what grounds, officer?"
"I smell marijuana." 3 words. The oldest trick in the book, and the one that requires no evidence at all. Only a badge, and "There's no marijuana in my truck," Jerome said quietly. "I don't use drugs. Never have." "Well, my nose says different, and last I checked, my nose has a badge attached to it." Kessler tore through the truck like he was looking for a fight, rather than evidence. He hauled Jerome's gym bag out and threw it onto the asphalt, hard enough to burst the zipper, sending a towel and a change of clothes skidding across the... He stepped on the shirt on his way past. He yanked open the center console and dumped a phone charger and a pack of gum onto the floor mat. He pulled a cardboard box of youth center supplies from the back seat. Markers, name tags, worksheets the kids had filled out 3 days earlier, and scattered them across the seat like garbage. Every toss was a sentence. "You don't matter. None of this matters. You are nothing out here." Then he reached the glove. He pulled out the manual, a flashlight, a tire gauge, and then a small black case, heavier than it looked. He turned it over once, flipped the latch, and stared down at a 5-pointed gold star hanging from a pale blue ribbon lined with white stars, resting on dark blue velvet. "What in the hell is this supposed to be?" Jerome turned his head. For the first time all night, something shifted behind his eyes. Not anger, something older and quieter, the kind of feeling that lives in the place where a man keeps the things he would. "That is the Medal of Honor, Deputy, presented to me by the President of the United States." Kessler laughed out loud, held the case up toward Doyle like it was a punchline he was. "Hey, Marcus. Our boy here says the president gave him a little necklace." Doyle took one look and went pale because, unlike Kessler, he'd stood in front of a case just like it, at the Marine Corps Museum on a school trip when he was 12. And he remembered the guide telling them you could count the living recipients. "Wade," he said, his voice tightening. "I think that's real." "Real?" Kessler snapped the case shut and tossed it back into the glove box, where it struck the edge and clattered onto the floor. "That's a $50 gang trinket from a pawn shop. That's what that is." Jerome closed his eyes. That medal had hung around his neck while his mother wept into her own hand. It represented 2 men he had carried across open ground under fire and a ridge line he had cleared alone, and now it lay face down on the floor of his own truck, dismissed in 4 seconds by a man who had never once wondered why a stranger might be telling. Kessler grabbed his arm, wrenched it behind his back, and slammed him against the hood, hard enough that his cheekbones struck warm metal. "Stop resisting," he barked. Though Jerome's body had gone completely, deliberately still, arms limp, legs steady, offering nothing that could honestly be called resist. Kessler needed the word anyway. He was already writing the report in his head. Doyle stepped forward. "He's not resisting. He's not doing anything."
"Cuff him, Marcus."
Doyle's hand shook as he pulled the cuffs from his belt. He looked at Jerome, and Jerome looked back at him. No pleading, no argument, just the stillness of a man who has already survived the worst night of his life once and knows he can survive. The cuffs clicked shut, cold against his wrists. Kessler walked him to the cruiser and shoved his head down into the back seat, where the vinyl bench smelled bleach and old sweat. Through the window, Jerome watched his own belongings scattered across the road behind him. The gym bag in the dirt, the worksheets from the kids lifting gently in the evening wind. He looked down at his wrists, the same hands that had dragged 2 Marines through gunfire, now locked in steel in the back of a patrol car, 40 minutes from the house where his mother still. And here is the part Deputy Wade Kessler had absolutely no way of knowing. The worst night of his career had not even started yet, because Jerome Calloway still had one phone call left to make, and the man on the other end of that call was 90 minutes closer than anyone in that department could possibly have guessed. At the Calder County Sheriff's Office, Jerome sat on a metal bench inside a holding cell, wrists raw beneath the cuffs, the fluorescent light overhead humming with a sound that drilled. A deputy he'd never seen before slid a phone across the counter without a word. One call. Jerome didn't dial he didn't dial his mother. He scrolled to a single word saved in his contacts, General, and pressed call. Calloway. The voice on the other end was deep, level, unhurried, the kind of voice that had commanded thousands of Marines across 3 days. Sir, I'm at the Calder County Sheriff's Office. I've been arrested. 3 full seconds of silence. Anyone who had known Theodore Marsh long enough understood that his silences said more than most men's. Arrested for what? Driving through a neighborhood, sir. They searched my truck without cause. They found the medal and called it a gang trip. I'm charged with resisting arrest and suspicious activity. Neither happened. Another silence, longer this time. Don't say another word, not one word. I'm on my way. The line went dead. General Theodore Marsh was supposed to be 90 minutes away at Fort Liberty. Tonight, by pure chance, he was 38, having stayed late at a veterans fundraiser in Charlotte. He told his driver to turn the car back at the station. Time moved like it had thickened. Jerome sat with his hands on his knees, silent, asking for. Kessler filled out his report at a nearby desk, relaxed, almost cheerful, cracking a joke to another deputy about the Marine with the fake. The other deputy laughed. Doyle, 3 desks away, did not. 41 minutes later, headlights swept across the front windows. A black government SUV pulled into the lot, followed by a General Theodore Marsh stepped out in full dress uniform. 3 silver stars catching the parking lot light, a chest of ribbons representing 31 years of service, 2 aides falling into step behind him. He pushed through the station doors hard and rattled the glass in its frame. The young deputy at the front desk shot up from her chair, so fast it rolled backward into the wall. Every head in the room turned. Kessler's pen slipped from his fingers and rolled off the desk. He did not. One of Marsh's aides stepped forward and laid credentials on the counter. Lieutenant General Theodore Marsh, United States Marine Corps. You are holding one of my Marines. Bring him out now. Nobody asked for paperwork. The desk sergeant sprinted to the holding cell himself. Jerome emerged 30 seconds later, still cuffed. Marsh stopped walking. His eyes went straight to Jerome's wrists, to the red welts pressed into the skin, and a vein pulsed once at him. Then he looked at Jerome's face, shoulder squared, chin level, still carrying himself, even now, like exactly what he was. And then it happened. General Theodore Marsh, 3 stars on each shoulder, one of the highest-ranking officers in the United States military tier, drew himself to full height and raised his right hand to his brow in a salute. To a man standing in. For anyone who doesn't understand what they were watching, this simply does not happen. Rank flows upward. Lower ranks salute high always. Except for one single exception carved into military tradition itself. Every service member, regardless of rank, regardless of stars on the shoulder, salutes a Medal of Honor recipient. Generals have done it for privates. It has nothing to do with rank. It has everything to do with honor. And in a fluorescent lit sheriff station in Calder County, North Carolina, a 3-star general was saluting a man in handcuffs. The room went dead silent. Not quiet, silent. The specific silence that falls when every single person in a space understands, in the same instant, that something has gone catastrophic. Kessler's face lost every trace of color. Marsh held the salute for 3 full seconds, lowered his hand, and who is responsible for this? Kessler had nowhere left to stand. Sir, I conducted a routine stop based on, I didn't ask for a story. I asked who is responsible. I am, sir. Deputy Wade Kessler. Explain to me why a Medal of Honor recipient is sitting in your holding cell and there'd been break-ins. He matched what description? What dispatch call described a black man in a black Ford F2? Read it to me. There was no such call. There had never been one. There was nothing except a black man driving through a mostly white neighborhood after dark, and every person standing in that station now understood it in the same. Marsh turned to the desk sergeant. I want both officers' body camera footage. Every second now. It took 11 minutes to pull. They played it on a monitor in the sergeant's office. Kessler, with his hand already on his holster, before a word was spoken, the flashlight in Jerome's face with no introduction given. The fabricated marijuana claim. The gym bag thrown onto the road. The shirt stepped on. The youth center worksheets dumped across the back seat. The metal case flipped open and dismissed as a gang trinket. The shove against the hood. The demand to stop resisting, directed at a man standing perfectly. Marsh watched without moving a single muscle. When it ended, he let 5 full seconds of silence sit in the room before he spoke again. You called the Medal of Honor a gang trinket. Kessler said nothing, because there was nothing left to say that wouldn't make it worse. This man carried 2 wounded Marines across open ground under direct fire. He cleared an enemy position alone. The President of the United States shook, and you put him face down on his own hood and called him a dog. I didn't know who he was, Kessler said, his voice cracking on the last word. You didn't need to know who he was, Marsh said. You needed to follow the law. You didn't, and it wasn't because you could. It's because you never once imagined you'd have to. By then, Sheriff Roy Pemberton had arrived, pulled from home in khakis and a golf shirt, looking like a man who had just been told his own house was burning. Pemberton was 56, a career politician in a uniform, 12 years running the department on a single formula. Keep the arrest numbers up, keep the complaints buried, keep getting. Kessler had been his best producer. 4 excessive force complaints in 8 years, and Pemberton had made every single one disappear. There would be no burying this one. He watched the footage. He looked at Marsh's stars. He made the fastest decision of his career. Deputy Kessler. You're suspended without pay, effective immediately, pending a full internal investigation. Badge and weapon. Now, Kessler's hands trembled as he unclipped his badge and set it on the counter, then the metal struck the wood with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence that had been a long time coming. Doyle was suspended as well. The footage showed his hesitation, his objection, his recognition of the metal, and it also showed that he had still snapped the cuffs shut when ordered. Hesitation without action, as the record would later put it, is just silence with extra steps. Every charge against Jerome Calloway was dismissed on the spot, all of it. Erased like it had never existed, because it never should have. Jerome walked out of the station beside General Marsh into cold, clean night air and stopped on the sidewalk to take one real breath. The first in hours that didn't taste like disinfectant. You handled that with more discipline than most generals I've served with, Marsh told him. Jerome was quiet. I just kept thinking about the kids at the center. What do I tell them Monday? Tell them the truth, Marsh said, and then we make sure it never happens to anyone else again. General Marsh did not go home that night. He went to work. Before most of Calder County had finished its first cup of coffee on Sunday morning, he'd made 3 calls. One to the Marine Corps Inspector General, one to a contact at the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, one to a military attorney at Fort Liberty who specialized in but it wasn't only the military machine turning. Somewhere inside that station, someone copied the body camera footage and quietly sent it to a reporter named Renee Okafor. She watched it once, then twice, then a third time, and by the 4th viewing, she already had her headline. The story ran Monday morning above the fold. By Monday afternoon, it had been picked up by every major network in the country, all of them landing on the same 4 seconds. A deputy holding the Medal of Honor and calling it a gang. That clip looped on cable news for 3 straight days. Veterans were furious. Families were furious. People who had never once questioned local policing watched that clip and felt something shift. By Wednesday, the Department of Justice had opened a federal civil rights investigation into the entire Calder County Sheriff's Department. Not just Kessler. And what they found went far beyond one bad night. Investigators pulled 18 months of traffic stop data. Deputy Wade Kessler had conducted 206 stops in that window. 161 of them, 78%, involved Black or Latino drivers, in a county where that population made up barely 21%. His 4 prior excessive force complaints had all come from Black men, all quietly closed by Sheriff Pemberton without outside review. In 2 of them, the complainants had been pressured by department staff to withdraw. In the 3rd, the paperwork had simply vanished. 2 other deputies were found to have filed supporting reports that directly contradicted their own body camera footage in earlier incidents involving Kessler. Federal marshals arrived at Kessler's home at 6:14 on a Tuesday morning. Neighbors watched through their blinds as he was led out in handcuffs, the same kind he'd used on Jerome Calloway. The charges were serious: deprivation of civil rights under color of law, filing a false police report, unlawful search and seizure. His defense at trial leaned on reasonable suspicion. The string of break-ins, the hoodie, a dedicated officer making a split-second call in a high-crime environment. The prosecution took less than an hour to dismantle it, laying the body camera footage, the dispatch logs, and the traffic stop data side by side until the pattern spoke for itself. The jury deliberated for 2 hours and 40 minutes, guilty on every count. Kessler's wife wept in the gallery behind him. He stared straight ahead, and even then, even in that moment, his face held the expression of a man who still could not quite believe that consequences had finally caught up to him. The sentence came down 2 weeks later: 5 years in federal prison, a permanent nationwide ban from law enforcement, and a place on a federal misconduct database that would follow him for the rest of his life. Only at his sentencing, when the judge read Jerome's victim statement aloud, the line about wearing his hands raw, pulling 2 Marines out of gunfire only to have them locked in steel in his own country, did something finally crack in Kessler. He put his face in his hands and did not lift it again until the marshals let him out. It was the first time in the entire proceeding that he looked like a man who understood what he had actually. Sheriff Roy Pemberton resigned 3 days after the verdict. His press conference lasted 4 minutes. He thanked the community for its support. He never said Jerome Calloway's name once. The DOJ report named him directly as a systemic failure, a leader who had prioritized statistics over civil rights and allowed a culture of unchecked profiling to. He faced no criminal charges, but a civil suit from Jerome would trail him for years. Deputy Marcus Doyle was not charged. The footage had shown his hesitation, his objection, his recognition of the medal, but it had also shown him snapping the cuffs shut anyway, and he was terminated from the department. In a statement released through his attorney, he wrote 7 sentences that newspapers across the country would quote for months. I should have done. I knew what was happening was wrong. I saw it. I heard it, and I didn't stop it. I told myself it wasn't my place. It was exactly my place, and I will carry that failure for the rest of my life. Jerome filed a civil rights suit against Calder County, settled out of court for $3.1 million. He kept almost none of it for himself. A third expanded the youth center into a full program running across. A third became a scholarship fund in his mother's name, the Odessa Calloway Future Leaders Scholarship, for first-generation college students out of Millbrook. The rest went to a veterans support fund and a legal defense fund for victims of police misconduct. 3 months after the settlement, a letter arrived on congressional letterhead. Jerome was asked to testify before a House subcommittee on policing reform. He said yes. He sat at a long table in a wood-paneled hearing room, with cameras lining every wall, General Marsh beside him in full dress. He spoke for 11 minutes without a single note, in the same calm, level voice that had once called out orders under enemy fire. About the stop, the search, the medal dismissed as a trinket, the 2 hours in a holding cell while a deputy joked about it, 20. Then, he said the line that would be replayed millions of times across every platform in the country. I didn't need the Medal of Honor to deserve, but nobody does. But the fact that I had one, and it still wasn't enough, that should tell you everything you need to know about where we still. The room went completely silent. One congresswoman wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and did not try to hide. So where is everyone now? Jerome Calloway still lives in Millbrook, on the same streets his mother once walked to work before sunrise. But things are different. The youth program he started with a handful of folding chairs in one room now runs across 2 counties, with 68 kids enrolled last. He still teaches the same things he always has: discipline, respect, the will to stand tall when the world keeps pushing you down. But now he teaches one more thing. Every new kid who walks through the door is handed a small laminated card. One side lists exactly what to do during a traffic stop. The other side carries a single sentence in bold print: "You deserve to be treated with dignity, and that is not a privilege, it is the." Wade Kessler is serving his sentence at a federal facility in Butner. He filed one appeal. It was denied. His wife filed for divorce 4 months into the sentence. His pension is gone. In a rare interview granted from prison last spring, when asked what he would say to Jerome Calloway if given the chance, Kessler was silent for nearly a full minute before he. "I built my whole career on trusting my gut," he said. "Nobody ever told me my gut was the problem. I know that now. I just know it 3 years too late." He will be eligible for release in 4 years. A federal database will follow him for the rest of his life. He will never wear a badge again. Marcus Doyle left law enforcement the day he was terminated and disappeared from public life for all. When he resurfaced, he was enrolled in a social work program at UNC Charlotte. He graduated last spring and now works for a community policing nonprofit, training officers on de-escalation and the specific, deliberate act of intervening when a fellow officer. He opens every session the same way: "I was the guy who said nothing. I want to make sure you're." Sheriff Pemberton's replacement was elected 4 months after his resignation. Angela Doreen Price, the first black sheriff in Calder County's history. On her first day in office, she made 3 changes: mandatory body camera activation with no manual override, an independent civilian oversight board with real subpoena power, and a zero-tolerance policy on racial profiling with automatic external review of every complaint. General Theodore Marsh retired the following year after 32 years of service. At his retirement ceremony, standing before a room full of Marines, he said the line that would become the most shared quote to come out of the entire story: "The bravest thing I ever saw wasn't on a battlefield. It was a man standing in handcuffs who kept his dignity when the people sworn to protect him tried to take it from him." So here's the question I want to leave you with. If you were Marcus Doyle, standing right there on that road, watching it happen in real time, feeling in your gut that it was wrong, would you have spoken? Would you have stepped between your partner and that man? Or would you have done exactly what he did? Stayed quiet, followed the order, and spent years wishing you hadn't? There's no easy answer here, and that's exactly why I'm asking. Tell me in the comments what you would have done. Tell me what you think still needs to change. And if this story got to you, not because of how it ended, but because you recognized someone in it, hit like so it reaches someone who needs to share it with anyone who needs reminding that they are not invisible. I read every single